Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Teresa. I do videos on whatever I want because I don't like putting myself in a box. And today I'm doing something a little bit different because I have been on this journey of trying to get my learning disability medically diagnosed. So for those who don't know or are new to my channel, I have a learning disability called dyscalculia, and it has only been diagnosed within the school setting. And so now, as an adult, I am trying to get Social Security benefits, which I am located in the United States. So this is probably different if you're in another country, but I'm trying to get Social Security benefits. And in order to do that, you need medical diagnosis um, to prove you have the disability. And so when it is medically, when it is diagnosed within the school system through an IEP, it can be very hard to prove that you actually have the disability, as then a doctor is not actually proving that you have the disability. And so I will talk you through this entire journey and what all of this means and go through the whole thing with you guys. So, for those who don't know, when I was in first grade, I was diagnosed with a learning disability. I went through all the testing. That was terrible, to say the least. And I got put on an IEP. So, in elementary school, um, they can run testing if they suspect anything, and the teacher has to suspect that something's going on, and it has to be over like a period of time. I think recently I read it has to be like over 6 months, which is a little interesting, just considering the timing of like school and stuff. But um, yeah, but they have to suspect that something's going on, and then they can do testing with a school psychologist. Sure. Um, and I definitely don't want this video to knock school psychologists or anything like that because they are professionals. Um, it's just, again, harder once you get out of schooling to use that documentation to prove you have a disability. But, anyways, I jump ahead of myself. And so, if you qualify, because there's a lot of things you have to meet, criteria you have to meet, you can get onto what is called an IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan, or you can do a 504. Now, these are two very different things. From what I understand, is a 504 is more modifying the environment for the child, whereas a IEP is really modifying how the material is being presented to the child and accommodating a lot of other things for the kid. So, a lot of times, what this involves is taking the kid out of class, usually like one time a day, to go work on separate material. So, for me, with math, it was separate math material. I never did the math that the class was working on. It was always like grade levels down from what they were working on. Um, and that's what I did during that time, and just doing my own kind of math stuff. And so that's what I would do. Um, Going through high school and stuff, I had other accommodations such as extended test time slash, quiz time. And we had these things called AR points. And since I could never pass those quizzes, we came up with an alternative way to gain those points, which was just writing a book report on those. and I got caught rewriting the back of the book once. And so that was the thing. So then I discovered Spark Notes and just basically rewrote that or whatever. But that was something I had on quizzes and tests. Something that would be done for me is like the matching of the definition to the term. One of my teachers would put like stars with the ones that would go together and then just leave the other ones as is. And then that way, like, it was called grouping, so I would know which ones would go together and which ones, um, you know, yeah, just basically which ones would go together. I don't know where my brain went with that. Um, so that was like a accommodation or whatever that I had. I had word banks available to me because there was no way that I could come up with the correct word if I didn't have a word bank. Um, so things of that nature. As I got older, and so the main thing though in elementary school was being pulled out of class to do my own thing and work with tutors. So that's the history behind that. And if you don't know what dyscalculia is, I'm going to play a clip here. And there is a wording in this that I don't like that the guy says. And I'll try and cut this off kind of early because it's kind of long. But it's from this podcast called the Neurodiversity podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, and it's actually pretty good. So, and they're educators who talk about working with neurodiverse students. So,
and honestly, even some educators aren't familiar with. I mean, in education here in the US specifically, we have specific learning disabilities in the area of math is what is federally mandated under IDEA. So they may know that particular term, but really understanding what that is, what are we actually talking about when we use that term, dyscalculia?
Yeah. So I think we refer to a specific learning difficulty in the domain of math, as you just articulated. We're talking about learners who are resistant to instruction, who are unable to grasp some very fundamental mathematical concepts. And I think the hallmark of dyscalculia is the inability to encode and retrieve arithmetic facts from long-term memory. It's literally in the name, dyscalculia, a disorder of calculation. But underlying that are difficulties in understanding quantities, how quantities relate to one another, and importantly as well, how quantities relate to symbols. So when you look at children who could be classified as having developmental dyscalculia, given their neuropsychological profile and given their resistance to instructional support, you will see that those children are much slower at, for example, judging which of two Arabic numerals is numerically larger compared to children without dyscalculia. But like dyslexia, of course, we do have some definitional ambiguity in the sense that there isn't a test. You can't go down to your CVS and buy a test for dyscalculia, but rather you have a school psychologist in conjunction with educators work with the child, run a set of standardized tests, determine a cutoff, and then assign the label. But I would say that like dyslexia, dyscalculia is likely on a continuum where there isn't a neat cutoff where you say, this group of children has dyscalculia, but this group of children does not. So that's an important caveat when we talk about these specific learning difficulties in general. But I would say it's really the inability to respond to instruction and therefore the need to identify compensatory strategies and to work, for example, in the domain of arithmetic on helping dyscalculic children develop better ways of calculating without engaging sort of a fact storage.
That's interesting that you mentioned that because
okay, so the thing in that I don't agree with is he says resistant to instruction, which I do guess that children specifically, I'm so sorry that I'm shaking this a lot. It's bouncing on my leg. But I guess I do see that a lot when talking about children. However, I don't really agree with that just because there's so much more than just saying, like, oh, you're resistant to instruction, because it's something, it's up here. It's not that we're being resistant to instruction, it's that we don't understand how you're explaining it to us, how it's being presented to us. So I don't really think it's as simple as being resistant to instruction. It's that how it's presented and how it's being explained is just not connecting up here because of the disability itself. So that is what dyscalculia is, and it is very much not understanding like quantity of numbers. Um, I was practicing yesterday uh, counting cents because that has always been an issue for me. And part of my job is to help adults with disabilities. And I have, I guess I can share this part. I have some that need help with money. And I was like, oh, this will be interesting because I also have issues with counting money. And so I was like, what's out there to like practice counting money? So I found this website to help count. And literally, I haven't done this in such a long time. And I found a website and I knew like the value of each, like, quarter, nickel, penny, dime. But to add it all in my head, I was like, I just can't do that. And so I really saw that like taking place. Um, but if I had my calculator, I could easily like add it up. And so, yeah, that's where like the quantity comes in. So definitely right with that definition right there. So that is what dyscalculia is. Now, something that's different with an IEP than a 504 is IEPs, they stop in high school. So if your child has an IEP all throughout elementary school and all the way through high school, it stops in high school. So if they decide to go on to college, they need to get reevaluated in um, senior year of high school, which is what I did. Interesting enough, my came back and said that I was just not paying attention. And I was like, literally, in all of the teachers' comments, they said, Teresa pays attention in class. And now, as I'm older, I definitely think I have ADHD tendencies, which I will get into later after this. So, with a 504, then, it is continuous all throughout if the child decides to then go on to college after high school. So going back to the ADHD thing, I was like, that is so weird. Every single one of my teachers was like, she pays attention in class. And I, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I was definitely not the typical student that you see with an IEP. Um, Here's what I mean. A lot of people, especially with dyscalculia, struggle with organizing tasks, getting things done on time, and other things as well. You don't really see these kids involved in an activity like band. I grew up a band kid, and I never needed the constant like nagging and reminders to get things done. I was very, very independent from the start. And I do think a lot of that had to do with being in band and being held to high standards, um, and just who my parents were, honestly. And that's a whole nother video. So yeah, yeah. Um, I even was told actually when I was talking to somebody as an adult about the fact that I have like a degree, specifically a bachelor's degree. They were like, "Oh, like you definitely are not like the typical person that we see receiving services." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm actually really happy that you acknowledge that because I don't feel like the typical person." A lot of people with dyscalculia, especially, don't feel like they can go through with college just because of all the math classes. And so that's another thing. A lot of people with dyscalculia can't do like dance classes. And I grew up a dancer as well. And I think the only way that I could do dance was because as a kid, we were forced to, from a very, very young age, I started when I was 3, we were forced to memorize dances. Where now I have a huge issue with this. They have like teenagers on the side of the kids showing them how to do the dance. And I was like, seriously? Like, I know my friend has says it's probably traumatizing that I was forced to like memorize the dance at a young age, but like that honestly helped me, especially with the fact that like I ended up having dyscalculia because a lot of people just can't do that because of like rhythm and like that motor skill and stuff, the gross motor skill. And like with band, a lot of people with dyscalculia and specifically can't do that because of like the timing and the rhythm and stuff, which I can't either, to be honest. If I do solo on anything, I literally can't because again, like the timing thing, I can't with counts. And interesting enough, I did music theory in college and I understood like how to count music. But if I have to play it, that's a whole different thing because I'm very like auditory. But anywho, so yeah. So now getting into adulthood, I ended up wanting to get benefits, and a lot of it again has to be like medically diagnosed. And we never did that route. We always just left it up to the school system to diagnose me and was never brought up to the doctors growing up because I don't know for any of you guys. Please let me know if you grew up in the early 2000s where your parents also like school stuff is school stuff and like health stuff is health stuff, because now I feel like a lot of parents are like, hey, this is also what's going on in school. And I think a lot of doctors now are like, hey, how is the kid doing in school? Like it's very more intertwined and like holistic that way. So let me know because my parents never brought up what was going on with school to the doctors. Granted, like my medical stuff was very different because of my rare condition growing up. So there was that. There was a lot more focus on treating that than other things, than focusing on like school stuff and bringing that stuff up. Um, I mean, I did find documentation of them like sharing with them like, oh, she's going to start like kindergarten soon or first grade, I think it was. But other than that, there was like no other like conversations about school that I found, unless they did and we just don't have the documentation of that. But um yeah, we never talked about it with doctors and stuff. And so yeah. And then as a young adult, I feel like I told doctors about my schooling and I shared with them being in school and what I was majoring in, but I never told them about the disability. Even my doctor currently, who I had, I didn't tell her about my disability until recently, until we moved. um, and I even started the process of getting disability stuff before moving. However, she didn't know about the disability specifically. And so, yeah, there was that. And how she found out was actually recently when we moved and I was becoming a patient at our current clinic. And on their form, they actually had something in the family history about learning disabilities. And so I put on there, like, yes, I have it. And it had for the mother's side and the father's side. And so I wrote on both of them that because of my adoption, I don't know like whose side it's on. And I kind of feel like if even if I wasn't adopted, I might not know like whose side it comes from anyways. But I just wrote, because of my adoption, I don't know what side it runs on. I just know I have it, and I do know that it's hereditary. Um, Learning disabilities tend to be hereditary. And so that's been there since I became a patient at the clinic. And then, like a few weeks ago, I had messaged her about getting benefits and the fact that I had talked to my supervisor about something in this state called able accounts, that if you don't, I guess, qualify for SSI, which is supplement security income, then you can get this able account, which can be used for like housing, transportation, food, medical stuff, things of that nature. And in order though to do that, you also still need like the medical portion of it that says like, hey, you have a disability. And so I explained that to her. I explained a little bit about the disability to her, and I also explained how when I was reevaluated in high school, it showed up that I just don't pay attention, even though all the teachers said I pay attention in class. But I did mention how I might have potential ADHD, and that I researched like inattentive ADHD, and how I've definitely been seeing that more lately in my life. And so she put the referral in to get evaluated. And then when I saw her this last week on Tuesday, we actually talked about it because they needed a note on like how it's affected my life. And oh my gosh, for the first time in 3 years that I've known her, I actually got choked up in front of her. And it was weird as hell, honestly, because this is the moment where I felt the most vulnerable in front of her. Meanwhile, I have been like, this is super TMI, but like done like pap smears with her and been like swabbed for like infections and stuff. And like this is when I feel most vulnerable in front of her, is telling her about like my learning disability. Okay. But I went through it with her on how it's affected my life, focusing mostly on money management, and directions as that applies like to my job, and the money management part of how like I really can't have jobs that has to like handle money. She asked how is like finances basically at home, and I said terrible. Basically said terrible now that I live on my own. um like I'm really trying to work on managing it better, but like it is difficult because I didn't tell her this part, but it is difficult just because everything is like being ran through my credit card or being straight taken out of my bank account. So like that's really hard to not like physically see um the money per se. But now I'm going back to like a spreadsheet and making sure I'm getting every single receipt and like marking, like keeping track of everything and knowing like where it's going. So, and I made a list too of like every single like expense, as far as like this is how much rent is, this is how much like internet is. I gotta switch electric on there because that just went up. Thankfully, my coworkers told me about that, and I was like, oh dear God, I liked when my electric was only like 20 something, and now I just got noticed like yesterday that it's like 79 something, and I was like, seriously, that's how much my car insurance is. So like electric is insurance, car insurance, medical insurance, I even have like allergy shots, how much that is, how much like the weight loss visits are compared to like a normal visit is. I should actually put that on there if that's not already on there. So yeah, um, that was kind of the main thing we talked about, because that's kind of where I've seen it more. And I kind of told her more about the ADHD on the sheet that we get before we actually see the doctor. It's all like the mental health stuff, and there's a part that kind of talks about like distractions lately. And I marked like several days this has been an issue of not being able to like focus. And so I was like, okay, I'll mark it since I have mentioned the ADHD thing. Something else I've noticed though is like doing a task and then immediately being like, oh, okay, I can do this other thing because it's going to take me like 5 seconds to do this other thing. So that's something where the ADHD has come into play. Yesterday, literally had like 500 things to do because freaking out about car registration thing because it's a whole situation. Finally found my car title, so hopefully that works and I can finally get my car registered in this state and I can get my Montana license plates put on and hopefully my job doesn't withhold my money now because I drive clients around. They can like withhold my paycheck if they want to. It was a whole situation, you guys. It was about to be a whole situation. So, yeah, I had to like handle all of that, like get my dad's information because he's also like on all the car stuff and also like plan meals for the week. I literally had to like write a list, which I normally like don't have to do. I usually don't need to like have lists and like prioritize things, but that had to happen and it was just a lot. Like I definitely get overwhelmed a lot more like recently and like I never really had that issue. I never had the issue of like having to like write things down. Um when I had my other job, like the forgetfulness really kicked in. And that's just part of I think the toxicity of that job. But anyways, so definitely noticed some more ADHD like tendencies and it's just kind of interesting because as soon as I read up on inattentive ADHD, I believe it's called, it made a lot more sense. Um, so yeah, and she even threw out anxiety as like a potential thing. She was saying how they'll probably do a panel for everything, and that a lot of times like those things go hand in hand, and she understood that. And I'm so thankful for her because a lot of times people go in and they have to literally explain what their disability is to their doctor. And I didn't have to do that with my doctor. So that was really nice. And again, she understood like, hey, ADHD can go hand in hand with it, anxiety can go hand in hand with it. Like, she understood because of the disability, like, there's an increased risk for these other things. So that was really nice. I will say I am nervous for the results to come back once I can schedule the evaluation because I don't know what that has in store as far as like medication because I don't know if it's severe enough or anything for medication. Um because I'm very in tune with myself on like, hey, I know when I need to back off of something and I know kind of like what I need. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. I won't lie. But I mean, that's where like the fact that I have such a good relationship with my doctor comes into play. So we'll tackle that when we need to tackle that and have that conversation when we need to have that conversation and go from there. So I hope you guys liked this video. I hope it was useful. I have nothing against learning disabilities being diagnosed within the school setting. However, I definitely think they also need to be diagnosed outside of the school setting through a psychologist. So that's just my personal opinion, especially because you don't know if your kid is going to end up wanting to get benefits and stuff. And so I think it's better to do that and do it before they turn 26 here in the United States, just because then with the criteria, it can get a little bit messy. So just to be on the safe side, try and do it before they turn 26. So that's just my opinion, and I don't think there's anything wrong with starting, honestly, with the primary doctor and going from there. And yeah, if you like this video, found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe down below, hit the bell for notifications. And I feel like I'm missing something. Don't think I am. I will see you all next week, and I will keep you posted on this. I am hoping that they will call next week. I called them again on Thursday, so I'm hoping tomorrow they will call and we can set up this appointment so we can get it done and over with, honestly, because I will end up taking the day off. It's very, like, grilling, honestly. Like, it's just a lot mentally. And so I want to get it done and over with, and yeah, and see like what the results turn out to be like, and have that conversation of, are we looking at medication, are we not, how do we feel about that, and go from there. But I will definitely keep you guys all informed. And yeah, all right, you guys, I will see you all next week. Hopefully you all have a good week, and I'll see you all later. Bye.